Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about scale ups. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, I have a question. And the question in question is, are you using my catchphrases now? I'm flattered. Where to find the best talent for a tech startup in Europe? Given that a startup should be able to scale fast when needed, would you say that London, Stockholm, Munich, Berlin, Paris, or that it doesn't matter would be your answer? Can you describe the positive and negatives of a city for a programmer's from a programmer's point of view, comparing places such as, say, London and Gothenburg? This is a big question, and it has many perspectives. I would say that for the most part, which city you find yourself in as a software developer, it definitely matters. And the same thing is for a company. Depending on where you set up your offices, you're going to have to deal with pros and cons. And I'll try to give you a holistic answer to this because it is an extremely complicated question, and I'll just try my best to answer it as well as I can. So first and foremost, what's really positive for the developers, which is not so positive for the companies, is that scaling up a startup, or basically scaling up any company, is probably one of the most complex things that a company can do. Actually, statistics show that only 10% of startups make it through the scale up. It's that complicated to do, actually. And this is very good for us developers usually because most companies have no idea how to sustainably scale up their systems and their business. So what they usually do is that they put a lot of work and effort into acquiring as much money as they can, and then they throw money at the problem by mass hiring developers, basically. Which is, well, it's a different sort of video, but the thing is, just because you hire a lot of developers, that doesn't actually bring you success. You think you do, you will get success because you add capacity, but the problem is that you're scaling linear in a linear fashion, and that's not sustainable usually. You need exponential growth, and to get that, well, you're gonna have to buy my special course on how to scale up a successful company and beat Google. But for a developer, the usual key factors when it comes to cities is going to be measured in three different things. It's going to be the availability of developers, it's going to be the company types, and it's also going to be the work culture. So let's just kind of walk through here. So one of the things that you should know about, say, a city like London, if you want to start an IT company, London is a very attractive place from many perspectives because it is a popular place to live. It is a metropolitan type of city where there's a lot of people coming and going. So if you set up shop there, you will have access to some very high prestige, high value customers. You're going to be in the thick of a commerce hub, if that makes sense. You're also going to be able to relocate a lot of developers from across the world because it is a popular place to live. So there are a lot of benefits from that perspective. The thing to know, on the other hand, is that it costs like, oh, you do not want to know what office spaces cost in central London. Just, yeah, let's not even talk about that. So from that perspective, there's pros and cons. But the thing is that there's also pros and cons from the perspective of finding people. Just because, as you can imagine, just because you start an office in, say, London, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all the developers because you have a lot of competition. There are a lot of companies, and so the competition for both developers and for companies is actually fairly fierce. So you have a lot of developers, but you also have a lot of companies, and so you might find that it's kind of levels itself out because, as I was saying, like the mindset that you have is that this is a metropolitan area, right? And that means that the companies might have a different way of thinking about how their hiring process should look. They might go for quantity and just cheaper hiring processes than quality ones. And the same thing goes with the developers. I mean, if you want the best of the best, quantity is only going to help you so much. Quantity gives you access, but you still have to find the best of the best. And so that is a fine balance that is really, really hard to determine. I can't really give you anything more than saying that the overall competition, both on the company side and on the developer side, is going to be fiercer. And from the perspective of a developer, the ideal thing for you, if we talk about, say, job security, well, that is to find a city where there are a lot of IT companies, but there's a small population, because then you have the pick of the litter. And that is one benefit, I would say, depending on preferences and so forth, that, say, a very small city like Gothenburg has versus a very large city like London. Doesn't really stop the recruiters from the UK from trying to recruit all of our developers anyway. They want to drain everybody. And so you should just have that with you, that even if you work in a small city or so forth, like the vast majority of companies around the world who are hiring in an international fashion, they are looking to relocate people and so forth. So you do have options, but that is one very nice thing about a smaller city versus a really large one, assuming that the ratio is correct, because if you're in the wrong city, a different sort of problem might occur, which is the second thing, company types. So if you are working in a really big city, or let's say for the sake of argument that you have a preference in the sorts of work that you want to be able to do, maybe you're a bit of a width type of person, you want to have a broad perspective on things, well, then having a lot of different companies is a very nice and good thing, and that is what you get from working in a bigger city such as, say, London. And this is where size really does matter. In a small city, you're fairly limited in comparison. I mean, if you don't really care about doing a lot of job hopping or things like that, then it doesn't really matter all that much to you. But if you do really want to try out a lot of stuff and have a lot of options and really pick the thing that is going to be right for you, a big city is usually where you want to go. But as I said, you have to balance that with availability, because there, as I said, with point one, the competition is usually much fiercer. So the last thing that is also usually a noteworthy thing is the difference in work culture. So because the thing, as I was saying earlier, about larger cities having a more throughput of people coming and going, and there's more access and there's more option for relocation, the companies who can actually afford to hire a lot of developers, they know that it kind of manifests, at least from what I've seen from my time in London, in that developers are less valued, if that makes sense, because the idea is that if we have enough money, it doesn't really matter, because we can get like a new person, and that is a really dangerous combination if you're dealing with a company who has the money and also doesn't value quality or things like that. It's that age-old problem where you can be the world's best at something, that doesn't really matter if the person who is paying you doesn't have the ability to appreciate the skill that you bring to the table. And in a smaller city, on the other hand, this is usually a very expensive thing. It's actually very common that, I mean, this is one of the things that a lot of people praise about the startup mentality, that they've realized, or like at the very least that the trend is, that it's very costly to lose a good developer. You lose a lot of domain knowledge, and you need to hire a new person, which is more money. It's a bad thing for a company to lose good developers, and this is increased almost tenfold in a smaller city, because the cost of you recruiting somebody from abroad or from the local pool is usually fairly high. If you just, as I said, like, this is a very big generalization, guys, but in general terms, you will see that the smaller cities, since they don't have as large a population, they try to keep the people that they have instead of treating them as disposable types of things. In many cases, that's not always true, of course. So what I want you to take away from this is that there are benefits, and like there are pros and cons with big cities versus small cities, and I can't really tell you that, oh, if you go to Paris the situation is going to be better than if you go to London and so forth. That it doesn't matter all that much. If you find yourself in like the main commerce hubs in Europe, most of the time you're going to find work, but you're going to face a few of these key things, as I was telling you. You're going to see more competition. usually in the larger cities, you're also going to have a much broader range of company types that you can pick from, which is a very nice thing for people who are a little bit adventurous and into the startup spirit and so forth. The work culture might also be different. You might find that the the work culture differs quite drastically. And if you want to be on the safe side in terms of job security and so forth, it might actually be a good thing for you to consider working in a city that is not one of the metropolitan areas or one of the biggest hubs. Simply because even if you go just slightly outside of the city, you will start finding that there are still IT companies, they need people, and they're having actually problems getting people in because they're not one of these hubs where everybody wants to live. So their pool is usually very limited in terms of who they can hire. Be a little bit mindful though, because culture and things like that, if all the companies in that region only hire consultants or do outsourcing and stuff like that, that's something to be aware of as well. And the best way to figure out what the truth of the situation is to just talk to a few companies in the region that you're looking at and try to just get the pulse, try to get a feel for, all right, what are the practices of the companies there? Are they all hiring consultants, or are they trying to do the Google thing, or what are they trying to do? Have a great day.